एसी चला दो. Hello everyone. A very happy weekend to all of you. Very logical weekend to all of you. And here we are with the editorial of the 4th of March, the first editorial of Indian Express. No full stops at G20. See, the headings speak a lot. No full stops. This is a figurative use. Full stop का मतलब क्या होता है? Something that is ending. That is a full stops, right? So no full stops means G20 meeting actually did not come up with anything that was concretely established. ये मीनिंग हमें इस छोटे से टाइटल से समझ में आ जाता है. And this is how you need to understand the titles. Whenever there is a question on title, no, you need to get this. Come on, let's see. We'll again be reading the article, simultaneously discussing the central idea, the main idea of that paragraph, then coming up with the vocabulary discussion. And yes, today we have a few extra shots too. So, the inability of the group of 20 foreign ministers who met in Delhi this week to agree on a final statement was no surprise. What was no surprise? The inability to come to a final statement. It was no surprise. That means they did not expect also कि सब लोग 20 countries जो हैं वो एक साथ मिलके एक ओपिनियन पे आएंगी. ये एक्सपेक्टेड भी नहीं था और क्योंकि वो नहीं आए तो ये सरप्राइज भी नहीं था. So, given the current polarized world environment amid the continuing war in Ukraine, expectations from the G20 meeting were not too high. The same thing that it was not expected, it was not a surprise, hence, not too high. But from this sentence, we can understand the meaning of the word polarized. So, if all the people do not come to a single consensus, that means they are of different opinions, and being of different opinions would mean that they are polarized or they are poles apart. हम पोल से वर्ड इस वर्ड से हम समझ सकते हैं पोलराइज्ड का मीनिंग. Yet, the fact that the foreign ministers could not agree to reiterate a formulation on Ukraine that they had articulated at the G20 summit in Bali, Indonesia last November underlines the deepening great power conflict and worsening crisis of multilateralism. That means the thing that they had met 3 months before at Bali, what they had stated could not be reiterated again here. That means फिर से नहीं कहा गया या फिर से agree नहीं किया उस पे. They could not agree to reiterate a formulation on Ukraine that they had articulated at the G20 summit. They had stated it there, but they could not reiterate it here. So, Indonesia last November underlines the deepening great power conflict and worsening crisis of multilateralism. The principal reason for the diplomatic failure at Delhi was the decision by Russia to walk away from the Bali consensus and China's decision to support it. So, as the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov put it, the Bali formula was a thing of the past. 3 months ago, when the Bali summit took place, the Russian invasion of Ukraine was in a disarray as it rapidly lost ground in the areas that it had occupied. So rapidly lost ground in the areas that it had occupied. तो पहले जो occupy किया था उससे उसे वापस जाना पड़ा. ठीक है, तो if these were the areas that it had occupied, moving here, but now it had to come back, so it was here now, right? So you can understand the meaning of disarray. Something that is not in a particular order or arranged would be in a disarray. Disarray. Since then, Russia has reinforced its defensive lines in Ukraine and is now in the middle of a renewed military offensive. Moscow has also successfully consolidated its expansive strategic partnership with Beijing. President Vladimir Putin appears confident that time is on his side and that a prolonged war would exhaust Ukraine, divide the West, and allow Moscow to prevail, if at a massive cost to Russia. मैसिव कॉस्ट मतलब बहुत ज्यादा महंगा पड़ेगा लेकिन एंड में वो रहेगा ही सही. So this was the major two sentences. Expectations were not too high. The fact that they could not agree to reiterate a formulation of Ukraine that they had articulated at the G20 summit in Bali. Then Russia has reinforced its defensive lines. This is what we can understand. And it is coming up with a renewed military offensive. So it is a prolonged war, but Ukraine will get exhausted. Meanwhile, US President Joe Biden has reaffirmed that the US and the West will stand by Ukraine for as long as it takes. Diplomatic room for Delhi, which led the effort in Bali to produce a consensus that all sides could live with, had clearly shrunk in the last few weeks. The room had clearly shrunk. Room का मतलब होता है space, right? Not this physical space, but जितना उसको free दिया जा सकता है space कि वो कोई भी काम कर सके, that would be called the room. So diplomatic room for Delhi means what all decisions it can take, or what all it can have an effect on. So that space has reduced, clearly shrunk in the last few weeks. India, which has the responsibility to lead the G20 at this difficult juncture, is not ready to throw in the towel. So this comes up, yes, as a very rarely used idiom, to throw in the towel. From the sentence you can understand यहाँ पर इसका meaning हो जाता है to quit or to give in. So India is not ready to give in, and why should it? It is confident that there is much time before the G20 leaders arrive in Delhi for the September summit. If the ground situation has altered in the few weeks since the Bali summit and led to a dissipation of the consensus, there is no reason to believe the current dynamic situation in Ukraine will remain unchanged in the next few months. ये बड़ा सही उसने रीजनिंग लगाया है और क्या रखा है कि अगर 3 महीने में यूक्रेन की सिचुएशन चेंज होती है इस तरीके से कि पहले जो कंसेंसस था नवंबर में दे हैड अ कंसेंसस, राइट? All these were together, all the countries were on the same ground, or they were seeing eye to eye. And from November to this February, March, you can say, right, a few members were कुछ अलग हो गए, माइनस पे चले गए, right? That means they changed their view. Now the our country says, or Delhi says, that if this situation can change in 3 months, we still have September to go. That means what? From March to September, we still have 6 months, right? Now these 6 months can again bring a drastic change in the situation on the ground level, and therefore no problem, we can still come up with all together, that is a consensus can still be had. तो जितने माइनस वाले थे वो भी प्लस में आ जाएंगे, तो मतलब पूरा एक हो जाएगा, that is consensus. So if it led to the dissipation, spreading out, scattering, it can again come back to the consensus. So Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who addressed the G20 foreign ministers, was realistic enough to recognize the time, though the PM underlined twin crisis in multilateralism today. At the same to continue the campaign to reform multilateralism and to get the world to take greater cognizance. Here, I'll read from here. It was realistic enough to recognize the profound crisis in multilateralism today. At the same time, though, the PM underlined India's twin ambitions to continue the campaign to reform multilateralism and to get the world to take greater cognizance of the challenges faced by the global south. Acknowledging the difficulties in producing a consensus on Ukraine, External Affairs Minister Subramaniam Jaishankar pointed to agreement among the foreign ministers on a number of issues of interest to India and the developing world. So these include food and energy security, cooperation to counter terrorism, climate change, global health, and disaster management. So these are the areas where these people have come to a consensus. India is right to remain optimistic and committed to a sustained effort to make the G20 summit in September a success. Right? So we have these 3, 4 points. First, that earlier they were on a consensus regarding Ukraine, but now the situation in Ukraine has changed. So this consensus is no longer viable, you can say. They have dissipated, they have changed their opinions, and coming up with India's take on it. So India is not able to do much here because then he said diplomatic room for Delhi is shrunk here. But India is not going to quit. It is not going to give up. Why? Because in the September the G20 summit is there, and India is optimistic that yes, by that time also the situation between Russia and Ukraine can change definitely. And on a positive note, it ends the yes, we'll be able to handle the situation in G20 in September. September. So, main ideas we have discussed. This is the foreign ministers meet underline the crisis in multilateralism. Yet, India must remain optimistic about the September summit. This was what was given in the last line, last paragraph. And the first part of the paragraph was underlining the crisis. So, discussing the vocabulary, yes, we don't have many words here today, but yes, polarized, you can use the word diverged. बाकी सब तो आता है, divided, separated, battling आ सकता है, diverged आप कर सकते हो, because one is going in this direction and the other moves in that direction. Reiterate is to repeat, recap, trouble, or to echo. Trouble नहीं, double echo. Articulated is voiced, expressed, or enunciated. ठीक है, so we can understand articulation of the speech. तो voice है, expressive है, ये भी ठीक है. Enunciated आप एक word लिख सकते हो if you do not know this. This array is something that is not in a proper arrangement. That is confusion. It could be alarm. It could be frenzy. Consolidated, of course, we have done this word many times. That makes up the word solid. And of course, we have the meaning of the word con, and con means together, combined. And we have solid, which we can understand कि एक ठोस चीज होती है solid. The consolidated का मतलब हो गया where they are uniting, fusing, and this is what is amalgamated. Consolidated would mean amalgamated, where the things are united and together. Cognizance, you have the root word cogne, right? That means to know. So cognizance is that quality, that trait of knowing something. तो वो awareness हो जाएगा, perception हो जाएगा. कॉग्नि याद रख सकते हो तुम recognize से. recognize का मतलब होता है फिर से किसी को पहचानना. तो जिसको देखा हुआ है हम उसी को recognize कर सकते हैं. ठीक है, cognizance से एक और word आ जाता है cognitive. cognitive dissonance ऐसा टर्म है साइकोलॉजी में. cognitive dissonance. Cognizance we understood. Perception. Sustained is something that doesn't stop. It goes on. So non-stop कर सकते हो, sustained है constant or maintained. Right? And if it is maintained, that means it is not given in. Not giving in means unrelenting. क्योंकि relent का मतलब given हो जाता है. ठीक है, तो unrelenting हो जाएगा. So a few words only you will get today, but yes, we'll get 3 or 4 idioms today. That is in the extra shot. And if you remember the idiom, we had this to throw in the towel. Now to throw in the towel का simple meaning हो जाता है give up, quit, throw in, हार मान लेना. Chuck up the sponge is another idiom. Drop by the wayside, another idiom. Drop out, another idiom. Fall by the wayside, another idiom. This is how you can actually express this word to throw in the towel. ठीक है, ये बहुत कम सुना हुआ है, and therefore you note it down in the idioms list. So throw in the towel, chuck up the sponge, drop by the wayside or fall by the wayside. You have 4 idioms now. The rest of the words you can understand. They are phrases, give up, throw in and drop out. ठीक है, phrases अलग होते हैं, phrasal verbs अलग होते हैं, phrases अलग होते हैं, idioms अलग होते हैं. ठीक है, this is the word quit, but to give up or to throw in or to drop out becomes a phrasal verb. ठीक है, हमारे पास बहुत सारे phrasal verbs मिल सकते हैं, right? Maybe I'll start with it next week or so. I'll definitely see how you can understand the phrasal verb. That's all for today. So have a logical weekend and bye.